Assalamu alaikum. Hope that you are all fine and enjoying good health. Today we will discuss ionic and covalent compounds. That what are ionic and covalent compounds and the properties related to these two types of compounds. Some questions related to this topic, short questions as well as long questions. Short question: what are ionic compounds? What are covalent compounds? Their definitions, as well as why ionic compounds are good conductors in molten state, not in solid state. And long questions: describe the properties of ionic compounds and write down the properties of covalent compounds as well. Most important topic of your book. Long question, properties both are very important, and short questions as well. What are ionic compounds? Ionic compounds are made up of positively and negatively charged ions. Positively and negatively charged ions. Consists of ions, not the molecules. That is the basic difference between ionic compounds and covalent compounds. That covalent compounds are consist of molecules, but here the ionic compounds are composed of or consist of ions. Why they are consisted of ions? Because if you talk about or go towards the topic ionic bond, you can easily judge there that there is a complete transfer of electron from one atom towards another atom. So the atom that donates electron have the positive charge, while the atom that accept electron contains the negative charge. NaCl, sodium chloride, is the most common example having the ionic bond. Here, there Na having the positive charge and Cl having the negative charge. So these oppositely charged ions having a great electrostatic force of attraction between each other, having ionic bonds, having strong electrostatic force of attraction, and that's why they are known as ionic compound. For example, NaCl. So the positive charges and the negative charges attract each other and form an ionic compound. Properties of ionic compounds: they are crystalline solids. They show crystals like NaCl, salt. If you talk about the example of salt, so there are different crystals present in the salt due to ionic compounds. Their electrical conductance, if we talk about their electrical conductance, so if we talk about their physical states, if they exist in solid state, they have negligible electrical conductance. They do not have the electrical conductance, very slight electrical conductance. While if they exist in molten or liquid state, molten means liquid. So if they exist in liquid state, they are good conductors. Why they are good conductors in molten state? Due to the presence of free ions in them. When you dissolve these ionic compounds in water, what happened? That the positively charged or negatively charged, so oppositely charged ions separate from each other and dissolve in water as a free ion, or mix up in water or stay as a free ions. That's why they help out to conduct electricity more efficiently. They have high melting and boiling point. Why they have high melting and boiling point? Due to strong electrostatic force of attraction between opposite charges, positive and negative. Fourth one, if we talk about the example, high melting and boiling point NaCl, melting point is 800 degrees C and boiling point is 1413 degrees Celsius. So very high melting and boiling points. Towards moving towards another important property, let's discuss a very important law of dissolving substances. So there are two compounds exist categories: polar and non-polar compounds. Polar compounds are always dissolved in polar compounds, while non-polar compounds always dissolve in non-polar compounds. Polar stands for charges. If the charges exist, if the ion exists inside the compound, it means that particular compound is polar. If charges do not exist, the compound is in state of molecules or it is formed by the mixing of molecules, we can say it is a non-polar compound. So remind it, keep it in mind that polar compounds always dissolve in polar compounds, while non-polar are always dissolve in non-polar compounds. Because ionic compounds have charges in them, positive and negative charges, that's why they are the polar compounds. So dissolve in polar solvents like water. So ionic compounds are polar and they dissolve in polar solvents or polar substances. They can't dissolve in non-polar. Why? Because they are polar, they can only dissolve in polar compounds or polar solvents. Next one you have, what are covalent compounds? Covalent compounds are made up of molecules, but in ionic compounds they are composed of or consisted of ions. They have covalent bonds, while ionic compounds have ionic bond. How covalent bond is formed? That is by the mutual sharing of electron between two atoms. Combination of two or more non-metals. So it is always be present in two or more non-metals, not between the metals. Got it? So covalent bond is always be formed between non-metals. So covalent compounds are always non-metals. Lower molecular mass gases and low boiling point liquids. If we talk about low molecular mass, the light compounds, they are gases and liquids having low boiling points. While if we talk about high molecular masses of these compounds, so those are solids. For example, organic compounds, complex organic compounds. For example, H2, that is gas, a very low molecular mass, while next one is the solid one, that is glucose, C6H12O6, so that exists a high molecular mass. Let's talk about its properties. First one, large molecules form covalent crystals which are stable and hard. If the molecular weight is very high, they will form crystals and they will be stable and hard. They are usually bad conductors of electricity, while the ionic compounds in molten state, they are good conductors because of the presence of ions. While here ions are not present, that's why they are bad conductors of electricity. They have low melting and boiling points, while in ionic compounds, they have high melting and boiling point due to the presence of strong electrostatic force. While here, electrostatic force is absent due to the absence of charges. Again, the rule is recalling polar compounds dissolve in polar, non-polar compounds dissolve in non-polar. So, because covalent compounds are non-polar, because they do not have charges. Polar stands for charges. So they do not have charges, they are non-polars. So soluble only in non-polar solvents like benzene, ethane, or common example you can take the petrol, diesel, etc. Thank you very much.